Evening, one and all. Welcome to the Chris Salcedo Show Worldwide here on the VIDA TV Network. Happy you've chosen to spend part of your evening with us here on the program. Lots to get into, varied topics from Donald Trump's overseas trip, the taxes, to what is going on with Judge Roy Moore and the double standard that we seem to be treated to here in the United States when it comes to Republicans, or should I say conservatives, accused of something, as opposed to liberals or Democrats accused of something. And it's a bipartisan issue. I will explain all of this coming up. Meanwhile, ChrisSalcedo.com, that's how you get in touch with the show. ChrisSalcedo.com. You have email and voicemail there. Just keep in mind your submissions could be used here on the air if you want anything addressed. If there's some subject matter that we're not covering that you think we ought to cover, let us know. On Twitter, at Chris Salcedo TX, at ChrisSalcedotx for instantaneous feedback on the program. Okay, first up, we'll deal with what's happening with Judge Roy Moore. Now, for those of you, let me give you a little background before we get to Senator Chris Van Hollen and his appearance this last weekend on Fox News Sunday. Judge Roy Moore is an outsider, for all intents and purposes, a political outsider to Washington. He is a rather, well, some say controversial figure, others say a morally grounded figure. He stood up for the Ten Commandments, the basis of our Judeo-Christian law here in the United States of America. He stood up for a monument to be continued to be displayed in front of his courthouse. Problem was, the federal government under Barack Obama's administration commanded him to rip those monuments down, as if the basis of our laws is somehow offensive to somebody, and because somebody's offended, well, then that must mean it's illegal. Craziness. This separation of church and state never appears anywhere in our founding documents, but anyway, that's Judge Moore's background. Now, Judge Moore defeated an establishment Republican by the name of Luther Strange in the last primary in the state of Alabama. Now, all of the information that has come out since then, accusations of sexual misconduct by the senatorial candidate, the Republican candidate, Judge Roy Moore. Now, look, I want to be very plain about this. I do not believe we ought to be convicting somebody or asking somebody to step down or step away because of accusations, unproven accusations. And I still believe that. I also believe the timing of the release of this information is not coincidental. As a matter of fact, it is my belief the Democrat Party and the establishment in the Republican Party had this information. And they've had this information for quite some time. And they wanted him, because they knew that Luther Strange wasn't going to win in Alabama, they wanted Judge Roy Moore to make it into the primaries. And out of the primaries into the general election, which he did. And my feeling is the establishment on the Republican side, they want Judge Roy Moore to go down in flames. They're already asking Mitch McConnell, what's his name, John McCain, other establishment Republicans are asking for Roy Moore to step down. Now, why would they be doing this? This isn't the first time many of them have heard this. It's the first time you and I have heard it. But this opposition research has been sat on till the opportune time. This, I believe, is the establishment's way of saying, oh, you want to vote for somebody that we don't approve? You think this is a government of, by, and for the people? Well, think again. So they found Judge Roy Moore. They allowed him to get into the next tier. And then they unleashed these accusations. And right now, all we know, folks, is they are 40-year-old accusations of sexual misconduct with minors. A serious charge. And in the era of Harvey Weinstein, like I said, I think those who sat on this information did so with intent, recognizing the environment we find ourselves in. So that leads us to Fox News Sunday and Chris Van Hollen, who is a Democrat senator. He was asked about Judge Roy Moore, and Sean Hannity, to his credit, who is not a journalist, is a talk show host just like me, did a really hard-hitting interview with Judge Roy Moore. And Judge Roy Moore, folks, as you're going to hear in a second, didn't accord himself well at all. And we'll break that down here in a minute. But I want to touch base, if I can, on what has happened since Sean Hannity did this interview with Judge Roy Moore. Keurig, who was a sponsor on the Fox News channel of Sean Hannity, dropped their sponsorship because a bunch of left-wing extremists, I shouldn't say a bunch, a fraction of left-wing extremists started tweeting about Keurig advertising during Sean's show. Even though Sean pressed Judge Roy Moore, certainly more so than the mainstream press did against Barack Obama or Hillary Clinton, Sean Hannity wanted to find out the truth. And he was digging and he was pressing, as you will hear. But Keurig pulled its advertisements from Sean Hannity's program on the Fox News channel. And boy, I would imagine they're regretting that move, because not only did Sean Hannity do a better job of being a journalist than most journalists these days and holding somebody who was on his political side of the equation, mine too, to account for what may or may not have happened with a tough interview. He also showed how the left-wing press doesn't do the same for their folks, the Democrats, the liberal extremists who are out there. And I'll illustrate this further. But anyway, Keurig basically said, well, since you're not indicting on allegations only, since you are not all about guilty until proven innocent, Sean Hannity, we're going to take away our sponsorship. And the blowback on Keurig is massive, ladies and gentlemen. It is massive. People are breaking their Keurigs. The boycott is on because of their patent unfairness. And to be clear, Hannity gave a tough interview, and then Keurig pulls their advertisement? Are you kidding? And the interview that Sean Hannity gave did not cast Mr. Moore in a positive light. Here is Chris Wallace on Fox News Sunday asking about this interview. He's going to play a snippet for it. Listen.
Congressman, Roy Moore has flatly denied ever having any improper relationship with teenagers. Sean Hannity asked him about some of the specifics on Friday. Here it is.
Do you remember dating girls that young at that time?
Not generally, no.
But you don't specifically remember having any girlfriend that was in her late teens even at that?
Not generally, no. Not generally, no, was his response. Now, look, when the Washington Post came out with these accusations first last week, folks, I was a little skeptical. Again, I still think the timing is all too neat. The timing of the release of this information was designed to bring maximum damage. And I don't believe those senators who are calling for Roy Moore to step aside because they're not up for re-election, I don't really think they care. I think these senators who are in the Republican side would rather be in the minority so the Democrats can stop Donald Trump. I think that's exactly the plan. Anyway, but Roy Moore didn't accord himself very well here, did he? I mean, when somebody asks you, hey, did you date somebody who's underage? The answer is no. No. And word came out late yesterday that another accuser has come forward. And if these allegations are untrue, you get onto the air and you say to Sean Hannity, no, absolutely not. But that's not what Roy Moore did. He had more to say. Listen.
That time?
I don't remember that, and I don't remember ever dating any girl without the permission of her mother.
Okay, so this went from these allegations are false to I don't remember. So this is causing a lot of people a lot of heartburn on my side of the political equation, in the Republican Party. And Judge Roy Moore did not handle himself well at all. So, again, that doesn't take away from the timing, doesn't take away from the questions. I think Judge Roy Moore raised more questions than he answered in this interview. But now I want you guys to focus. And here is where we get to the duplicity of the swamp or the establishment. I want you to listen to Chris Van Hollen's reaction, senator from Maryland, to Judge Roy Moore. Listen.
Senator, your reaction.
Well, Chris, I think Roy Moore is unfit for office.
Unfit for office. Remember that. Unfit for office based on these allegations, says Senator Chris Van Hollen.
But this is going to be a decision, obviously, for the people of Alabama.
Yeah. Okay. So unfit Obviously, a decision for those in Alabama. Now, later on the interview, Chris Wallace asked the same senator, Chris Van Hollen from Maryland, about a Democrat senator by the name of Bob Menendez from New Jersey, who is on trial right now for corruption charges and who stands accused of having sexual relations with underage prostitutes in the Dominican Republic. Now, let me point out to you that these accusations have been out there, and Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell has not called for Senator Menendez, a Democrat, to step down. John McCain has not called on Senator Menendez to step down. Jeff Flake has not called on Senator Menendez to step down. Bob Corker has not called on Senator Menendez, a Democrat, to step down. But many of these guys did for Roy Moore. An allegation against a political outsider and a Republican, and an allegation against a Democrat who is currently on trial. But only one calls for demands, gets demands for resignation, and that's the Republican, the outsider Republican. Now, Chris Wallace asks Chris Van Hollen about New Jersey Senator Menendez.
As long as we're talking about allegations, a jury in New Jersey is right now considering not allegations, but charges of political corruption against Democratic Senator Bob Menendez. If that jury convicts him, not allegations, but a conviction, should he step down?
Chris, we're going to leave this decision to the jury.
Oh, whoa, wait a minute. Upon the allegations to Judge Roy Moore, this same Democrat said that Roy Moore was unfit. Now, the same accusations being, and more actually, underage prostitution by Senator Menendez and corruption charges to a member of his own political party. Oh, but that's not a sign of being unfit? Really, Chris Van Hollen? Now, let's let him finish his answer and see if he gets around to saying Senator Menendez of New Jersey is unfit.
And I'm not going to get ahead of the game. People on the jury will look at the facts, just like people in Alabama will have to look at the facts, and they'll have to render a decision. And I'm not going to speculate about what the outcome of that jury decision will be.
Hypocrite? Much? Yes, he is. Yes, he is. So, and notice, folks, I called out both political parties here, the Republican Party and the Democrat Party. Now, what's going on here? I can tell you it's the establishments of both political parties, the club. Senator Menendez is part of the club. He's been accepted. So they circle the wagons, Republicans and Democrats, around Senator Robert Menendez. Judge Roy Moore, whether the accusations against him are valid or not, Judge Roy Moore is an outsider. Judge Roy Moore is a strict constitutionalist. Judge Roy Moore would threaten the establishment power base of Mitch McConnell and Chris Van Hollen. So he gets thrown under the bus, declared unfit on accusations. Meanwhile, accusations toward a Democrat draws no ire from the Republican side or the Democrat side. The fix is in. It's always been in. It is they up on Capitol Hill, these establishment folks, against we, the people. And they are caught in being rank hypocrites. Folks, we got more coming up on the Chris Salcedo Show Worldwide. Don't go anywhere. Full show yet to go on the VIDA Television Network. Welcome back to the Chris Salcedo Show Worldwide here on the VIDA TV Network. Part two of our getting caught up on a whole bunch of news tonight. Taxes. I don't know if we got into this last week, but let me summarize what has happened. The House of Representatives has put out a tax plan. It's not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but it does a couple of key things. It eliminates tax brackets. It tries to simplify the tax code for the vast majority of Americans. And it tries to have a more economic-centered agenda moving forward, bolstering the U.S. economy, more money in your pocket. There are some things that I don't like about the House bill, but by and large, it's way better than what we have now, this nonsensical, aptly named progressive tax code. Then came the Senate. The Senate basically said, here we are, we believe that government is the end-all and be-all, and let's put forth a tax proposal that will make sure that government is the center. We're going to keep all 7 tax brackets. We're going to keep it just as complicated. We're going to make sure that you got to hire a legion of CPAs just to make sure you pay us what we think you owe us in the federal government. Government is at the center of the Senate offering, not we the people. And that's what the Republicans have done on the Senate side. It's nonsensical. It's absolutely government-centered, I guess is the best way to put it. Doesn't have you and your family in mind. Kevin Brady, he is with the House, not the Senate, the House. And he is the chairman of the Powerful Ways and Means Committee. He was visiting with Chris Wallace this last weekend, and they were talking about the GOP tax plans, how they are so different. The GOP in the Senate, which is basically government-centered and government lording over your life, and the House version, which tries, at least takes steps toward empowering the individual, simplifying your life, and lowering, by and large, your tax burden. Here's how the first part of the conversation went with Chris Wallace and the chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee, Kevin Brady.
President Trump called into a meeting of Senate Democrats this week, and he reportedly said this. He told them about the Senate plan. You're going to like it, the Senate plan, a whole lot more than the House plan.
Now, Chris Wallace went on to ask Kevin Brady, hey, are you afraid that Donald Trump is going to undermine the House the same way he undermined and called the House Obamacare repeal mean? And that served to allow the Senate Republicans to kill Obamacare reform. And that was this whole line of questioning by Chris Wallace. Now, look, sometimes I think the press reads a whole lot more into this than really needs be. You're going to like the Senate's plan more. Now, and he's saying this to Democrats. Now, why would Democrats like the Senate version more? Well, because it's more bureaucratic red tape. It enslaves the American people more to government bureaucracy. So, of course, Democrats are going to like it. It's government-centered. Of course, Democrats are going to like it. I didn't hear a value judgment being uttered by the President of the United States as to which one was more meritorious. As a matter of fact, the tweets that have come out from the President is basically saying, thank you, House, thank you, Senate, for working as hard as you're working on your respective plans. And that's about as choosy as Mr. Trump is getting about this. But I think that Donald Trump may have demonstrated some political acumen when he said, hey, all you libs, if you want a government-centered, bureaucratic piece of garbage nonsense, then Mitch McConnell's Senate, they've given it to you. Go for it. Go for it. You'll love it. So what it says to me is that the Senate version isn't worth the paper it's printed on because it's just more government-centered nonsense, which is what you'd expect from a Republican Party that seems to be run by the Democrats. Kevin Brady went on to talk about how this really wasn't something that he considered to be much of a problem, even though he was being pressed by Chris Wallace.
So how do you explain? What do you make of the president saying to Senate Democrats, I think you'll like the Senate plan a lot more?
Well, I know that's the Senate Democrats' description of the call. All I can tell you is my conversations by telephone with the president are extremely positive.
Yeah, well, okay, so he took the high road. He wasn't going to take the bait on this, and I think the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, Kevin Brady, was probably right to do that. By the way, Kevin Brady's been a guest on this program, on the Chris Salcedo Show Worldwide, on the VIDA Television Network. Now to some of the nitty-gritty of the tax plan.
I talked with a number of top financial analysts this week. None of them said that having a tax cut, a lot of them supported the idea of a tax cut, but none of them said that having a tax cut that will add $1.5 trillion to the national debt, which is what your plan does, that's good for the economy.
Okay. First off, it's predicated on the notion that spending will not be cut or reduced. I mean, the tax cuts are good. Nothing says that government has to continue its current rate of spending, except for intransigence of swamp creatures up there on Capitol Hill. If you guys ever hear this phrase called mandatory spending, whoever's saying it, I want you to laugh in their face. Congress instituted the spending. Congress can stop the spending. There is no such thing as mandatory spending. If you want to think of what mandatory spending really is, think of it, mandatory spending equals spending that Republicans and Democrats are too lazy to stop or don't have the political will to stop. That's how you can look at mandatory spending. But Chris Wallace is looking at some independent analyses that show that the reduced tax brackets will bring in less money to the federal government to the tune of $1.7 trillion over 10 years. Hold on, you guys can't see that. 10 years. 10 years. Let's think about that. 10 years, $1.7 trillion. Now, that is assuming that the growth that will go along with the House tax plan won't happen. Typically, when you cut taxes and you reduce costs and burdens, the economy tends to take off and it tends to create jobs, and the base expands unless you have more receipts going into the federal government. It happened when Kennedy cut taxes. It happened when Reagan cut taxes. So this is what will happen. The economy will grow and more money will be coming into the federal government. It's inevitable. It always happens that way. So, yes, there will be more money coming in, and that $1.7 trillion I don't think will materialize. But consider this, $1.7 trillion over 10 years. Do you know how much Barack Obama added to the national debt as he was overseeing the federal government for the last 8 years? He added $10 trillion over 8 years. Mr. Obama could add to the debt in 1 year what Kevin Brady's plan is proposing to do in 10 years. If that worst case scenario were to play out, which I don't believe it will be. But did you hear all these same voices saying, oh no, we can't spend $1.7 trillion, overspend $1.7 trillion in 1 year? Did you hear all of that? No, you didn't. As a matter of fact, Barack Obama was not only the first occupier of the Oval Office to ever ring up over $1 trillion in one fiscal year in deficit. He did it 4 years in a row. Absolutely. If Bush's overspending was wrong, Barack Obama's overspending was criminal. Ladies and gentlemen, here's how Kevin Brady answered this question.
Well, I have to tell you what, I disagree here. So during the Obama administration, they would add $1.5 trillion of deficit every year. That was to grow Washington. We're talking about the same amount spread out over a decade to grow the economy and grow jobs. This is a good investment. And in fact, if we just grow the economy slightly over the last decade's slow growth, you recoup the $1 trillion easily. And if we really get this economy moving, you recoup all of it plus more. So I will tell you the surest way to guarantee more deficits and more debt is just stick with the current tax code, stick with the current economy.
Yeah, one more thing. You're going to hear that the House version is a giveaway to corporations. As a matter of fact, the Senate plan delays the corporate tax cut for a year. Let me be as plain with you as I know how to be. The corporate tax rate is 35% right now, folks. It's the highest in the world. Our corporations, courtesy of our very own government, are at a disadvantage around the rest of the world because their governments are taxing them at far less a rate. Here's another thing. Corporations do not pay taxes. I'll say it again. Corporations do not pay taxes. You do. I do. Because corporations and businesses pass on their tax burden in the cost of their products. And you and I will pay increased costs of products to pay for their tax burden. So when their tax burden falls, guess what? The cost of production, the cost of the products that you and I buy and pay for, that drops too. That puts more money into whose pocket? Ours. That's correct. Ours. All right. Other things going on this weekend. International news. Of course, Donald Trump coming back from his historic overseas trip. And this was rather interesting.
Trump said he wasn't interested in arguing over meddling and instead wanted to get Russia to work with the U.S. on problems like North Korea, Syria, and Ukraine. The president taking to Twitter to slam his critics, writing, "When will all the haters and fools out there realize that having a good relationship with Russia is a good thing, not a bad thing?"
How can I put this in the most plain spoken and succinct fashion I know how? Russia is not a friend to the United States, at least under Vladimir Putin. This drives me nuts when President Trump tries to glad hand with a man who has undermined the United States' interests and our allies across the globe for the last 10 years. It started in the Bush administration. He invades Georgia. It continued in the Obama administration, and Obama allowed Vladimir Putin to roam around the globe as a war criminal for the last 8 years. Why on God's green earth would we ever accept Vladimir Putin, who's a wannabe dictator who undermines our own national interests? Why would we accept him as being anything but what he is, an enemy? Yes, it's nice that we get along, the International Space Station, that cooperation, fine. But let's not pretend that he's a friend. For crying out loud, he's not a friend. And yes, Russia did try to interfere in our elections, as they've done for decades. They've not stopped. Come on, President Trump. Come on.
In another tweet, the president actually took a swipe, Chris, at the leader of North Korea, Kim Jong-un, who has repeatedly called the 71-year-old commander-in-chief old. The president tweeting, "Why would Kim Jong-un insult me by calling me old when I would never call him short and fat?" The president added that he'd been working hard to become his friend, and despite the dust-up, was holding out hope that that could still happen.
Right. That's John Brennan. Here's his explanation as to why the president seems to seek out Vladimir Putin's approval.
I think Mr. Trump is, for whatever reason, either intimidated by Mr. Putin, afraid of what he could do, or...
Mr. Brennan is a left-wing hack, ladies and gentlemen, who gave away our nation's security for Barack Obama's sake. That's how you get in touch with the show, ChrisSalcedo.com, at Chris Salcedo TX on Twitter. Have a great night, everybody. See you tomorrow. The Chris Salcedo Show Worldwide on the VIDA Television Network.